About a month ago, this cryptic message was posted on the official Pantheon Rise of the Fallen social media, and it sent the community into a frenzy trying to figure out what it was. And now we finally have the answer, but there's still more to this than meets the eye.
This is BazgrimTV. Learn, laugh, level up.
Before I get too far ahead of myself, I should mention that if you enjoy informative videos about Pantheon, hit the subscribe button now if you haven't already, because this channel is completely dedicated to that. This is where I take as much information from the Visionary Realms developers as I can, and make it quicker and easier for you to understand to help you stay up to date with the development process. And there are a lot more videos like this on the way, but with that, let's get back to it. So less than a day after this original picture was posted, they then posted this, which only created more suspense and fueled speculation among the community about what the heck was going on. And the next day we got hit with this one. And then the exact same image was posted again later that day. So at this point, some people were starting to get flashbacks of that Fortnite black hole at the end of Season 1, which happened just a couple months before, where the game completely stopped and players were just left staring at a black hole. But I'll get into that a little more later, because the next picture was this one. And at this point, it's like, okay, that's cool, but what does it mean? And we were left wondering for a little while until the release of this teaser trailer. So it's a new logo. That made a little more sense. And as soon as that was revealed, the team changed the Pantheon social media profile pictures to this new O logo all across the internet. And at first glance, I think it looks pretty sweet. Certainly a lot more interesting compared to the previous logo. And in the last video newsletter, Visionary Realms creative promotional content David Rohret explained how this wasn't really a full rebrand as much as it was just refreshing what they already had. They spruced up the font and made the subtitles stand out more, and explained how important it was that the logo look weathered. But I'll get into that a little more later, because of course the elephant in the room is what's up with that O. Well, if there's one thing I know about the Pantheon developers, it's that they love to inject lore into absolutely anything they can.
I mean, this is really a chance to start bringing the story and the setting of Pantheon to life. We're building the game that way. You guys know us well, that everything we do starts from the ground up with the lore and the story and the context. And we want to bring that to everything and have that reflected in everything, even the logo.
I usually don't talk about the lore of Pantheon a whole lot in my videos, but it's really interesting, so I'm excited. Let's go back and start at the center of the logo and then work our way out. The devs have confirmed that this is Terminus. It is not a black hole. It is the planet on which Pantheon takes place, plain and simple. But this next image is one where the devs actually did not give us any confirmed meaning. And that's intriguing because it appears to be an eclipse, and eclipses have significant meaning in the history of Terminus. Now, if you know me, you know normally I like to only stick to the info that is confirmed by developers, but in this case, I think there's enough evidence to make this bit of conjecture at least worth mentioning, so buckle up for a minute because we need to do a little lore dive to back it up. There once was a race of people on Terminus known as the Jinto, and they had a god named Itero. But about 500 years ago, Itero became diseased by what was vaguely described as an eyeless face of an eclipse. Ironically, Itero's wife Janavi had to descend him from godhood in order to preserve him. But he then went mad, calling himself the Ravaging Lord, and then began to corrupt some of the Jinto into a vicious army known as the Revenant. He then unleashed them across Terminus to destroy everything in their path. They were eventually foiled by the timely arrival of the War Wizards, although the Revenant are still a potent force in Terminus today, and that campaign known as the Deicide War was a very influential time in Terminus's history. and it can all be pretty much traced back to that mysterious eyeless eclipse. And that's just the little we know about it so far from the lore we've been given. So personally, I don't think it's a coincidence that there appears to be an eclipse in this logo. But I guess I'll have to leave that up to you to decide, because even scholars of Pantheon lore that I've talked to can't seem to come to a conclusion about this. Now, if you want to learn more about the lore of Pantheon, I made a video that's a more broad overview of the history of Terminus in only 5 minutes, so if this has whet your appetite at all, I'll include a link to that as well. But for now, let's move on, because if you look closely in this next image, you'll notice 9 white dots surrounding the planet of Terminus, and we do know for sure what these represent.
Look closely, you'll count 9 stars, 1 star for each race. And that's the story of how Pantheon found a new logo.
And some of you guys guessed that stuff too. Like spot on with the 9 stars and all.
Like spot on. I was watching the streams and it's like, I count 9 stars. I think Bazgrim did. I count 9 stars. I wonder if that's 1 for each race. I'm like, it is.
Yeah, that's right. I'm basically a prophet. But don't ask me when the release date is. If you zoom in a little bit closer, you see these dots? And again, I don't know. This is just all this is my theorizing. I don't know. You see these dots, little dots. If you count them up, there's 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That might be, it could just be a coincidence, but that might be representing the 9 planets that each of the 9 races started off. But I know, this video isn't about me or my uncanny ability to predict things. These unassuming looking white dots are significant because the lore tells us that fragments from other planets have inexplicably arrived on Terminus, and these so-called collisions brought not only the landscapes to Terminus, but also some of the inhabitants and their deities, also known as Pantheons, which is where the name comes from. But the lore is intentionally shady as to why and how this is happening, as that's one of the primary stories that we'll be able to discover in-game ourselves. There have been at least 10 of these collisions that we know of, but 9 of them have brought races that we'll be able to actually play in the game. And so each one of those planets that those races came from are represented here in this logo. They are Oldasa, the home of the dwarves, Cenalan, the home of the elves, Gorok, the home of the ogres, Isul, the home of the Darkmere, Roa, the home of the Archai, Vasdemeth, the home of the humans, Hirith, the home of the halflings, Dashoth, the home of the Scar, and Stormona, the home of the gnomes. Oh, and these blue swirls, you ask? Well, again, they didn't specifically address this aspect of the logo, but if we're going off the basis that every detail was put here for a reason, we can try to find some hints as to what this might be. And from what I can tell, it's possible that this too is related to the story of Idero and Janavi, specifically when Janavi sacrifices herself to imbue her power in the remaining Jinto to create the Remnant, which are dedicated to fighting back against the Revenant. Quote, Idero glimpsed the light of Janavi's passing, said to be manifested in a bright array of swirling prismatic auroras that swelled across the skies, end quote. And then of course lastly we have the O itself, which is obviously shattered, and according to the devs this represents the fragile nature of Terminus. When you get into it, Terminus does seem to have a pretty tumultuous history to say the least. Now, at the point when our characters enter the story, things have stabilized a little bit, but the scars of the planet's storied past are still visible, and that's what will make learning about its history in-game so interesting. But at the same time, there's still a lot of uncertainty as to what the future will bring as well, so I'd say it's fitting to describe the planet as fragile. In fact, if we go back to the lore for a second, I think it's best summarized by Semina, who was the last high priest of that aforementioned Jinto race. And in the story where he first told of that eyeless eclipse, he also wrote this, quote, there is a war waged beyond our gods for many things, and this world is one of them. To these higher sovereignties we gave our nothing, and they gave us Terminus. Though lain in a bed of thorns, this world is a cradle of infant hope for we old orphans. This is our wild, delicate cosmos now. This is our undeserved inheritance, our humble crown, and we must exhaust ourselves knowing and discovering it, lose ourselves defending it from within." End quote. So altogether, I think they've very eloquently captured a visual retelling of the history of Terminus. I really appreciate when people create things with this sort of subtle symbolism in mind, and so if this is indeed any indication of the amount of attention to detail that they're putting into the game world itself, then we have a lot to look forward to.